Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, this podcast is ranked by Apple as being among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. So let me say thank you to all of our guests and listeners for making this a reality. And if you enjoy our podcast, please leave a review. Now, question for you. Being in the thick of this 2024 presidential campaign, how does one actually run a campaign? What issues do you focus on? What are some of the actions you must take and actions you must avoid in campaigns? Now, my guest today can answer that and other related questions. He is the founder of Publitics, providing counsel to campaigns at the local, state, and federal levels, as well as to clients in the private and public sectors. He has worked on special projects during President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, and he's also served as an adjunct professor at Centenary University's Business Development, teaching in their social media program. Prior to founding Publitics, he was staff on Florida Dickinson University's Public Mind Poll and later adjunct instructor teaching freshman seminar public science students. So joining me today is Matt Krayton from Caldwell, New Jersey, founder and principal at Publitics. Matt, thank you so very much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So look, give us an overview of what you do for clients in politics as far as campaigns are concerned.
Sure, absolutely. This is a fun question. This is one of those things that you get from family around the dinner table, right? It's like, what exactly do you do for a living?
Yeah.
I get that a lot, and it's not immediately clear because I think this job is so varied. There are a number of things. So at its most basic level, we help our clients develop message, strategy, and then help them deploy that message and strategy in a political campaign to reach voters, persuade voters, and then mobilize voters that you want to get to the polls on election day. So from a tactical perspective, our firm focuses on the communication side of campaigns. So we do a lot in a lot of television advertising, digital, direct mail, so the sort of traditional stuff you would do in a campaign, plus polling, research, and then overall message development and general political counsel. So, we, like you noted before, we work with candidates at all different levels to build out their campaigns, their strategies, and then we fill different roles within each of those campaigns depending upon the needs.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about when you say you're doing polls in terms of developing the questions to ask, because that winds up being key. What sort of information are you trying to extract from the folks that you talk to when you're doing your polling?
Sure. Yeah, that's something that I think is of interest to a lot of people right now. As we're in the middle of a pretty historic, presidential cycle. Everyone's got their eyes on the polls, the horse race, who's up, who's down in any given week. So what you typically see in the public eye are polls that do measure the horse race, right? Like which candidate is ahead, and it's really a snapshot in time, right? So polling, I should note, especially the stuff that you see publicly, is not meant to be predictive of an outcome at the end of the day. It's just what is happening right now in this moment that we're taking the poll. And So again, what you see publicly is the horse race, which candidate is up, which candidate is down. Sometimes you see a little bit of issues polling, so like what issues are important to folks, what issues are less important. And then, some of the public polls try to get into what's driving voting behavior or vote choice in that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, when we're doing the polls for a campaign, that looks a little bit different. So we do a lot of the same things in terms of measuring who's up, who's down, but we also try to figure out how to frame specific messages in a given campaign and in a given electorate. So you ask questions that you try to dig in a little bit deeper into what people are feeling, and then how to talk about issues that are most important to people. And oftentimes we'll combine polling with more qualitative research like focus groups and some other online tools that help sort of mimic focus groups, where you can really dig into the why of what people are feeling. And then you try to measure that at scale in a poll. So typically in a poll, you get some measurement of how the candidates are performing, and then you introduce a battery of messages, some positive for your candidate, some negative against your candidate, some positive for the other candidate, some negative on the opposition candidate, and then you measure again who's up and who's down to try to simulate movement as if you were communicating during the campaign. So those are the sort of things that we try to dig into. In addition to on the public affairs side of things, when we're doing issues advocacy, how people feel about particular issues.
And I think that's, well, needless to say, that some of that is very, very important information, because you can't just sort of, as they say, wet your finger and stick it up in the wind. That does not, bode well for folks who are, going to do something like that. That you have to ask the people that you want to vote, what interests you? What is it that you like? What is it you don't like? Why is it that you don't like this, that, or the other? And that's the kind of thing that helps people determine, I guess, the policies that are going to be put together.
That's right. And one of the interesting things too is you could be fundamentally hold the same position as the majority of voters. So as a candidate, you may have the same position on a particular issue, but it's really a question of how you talk about that issue too. That makes a big difference in how people perceive it. So, it's a really interesting process to see, again, how to frame those messages specifically for particular targets in the electorate. So, how do young voters, for example, respond to this type of communication or that type of communication, this type of message, that type of message? How do rural voters, respond to a particular message around different pieces of a candidate's agenda? And then also, too, another thing that we have been exploring a lot more of within our research, both internally and for clients, is also testing messengers, too. So, the message is very important, but you also need a credible messenger to deliver that message, right? Because if you could pluck anyone off the street, tell them to say the magic words, and you would hope that would convince the electorate to vote one way or the other. But the issue is, people tend to respond to other people they perceive as having the same experiences as them, same lives, similar lives to them. So it's important to figure out who those credible messengers are on those particular issues. So that's another thing that we try to measure as well when we're looking at the polling and the numbers.
I think that's a huge point, because, sometimes it's not the message, but the messenger that can get people to pay attention and take some actions, in the sense that you want them to take action, either for or against something.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, a lot of our political discourse actually has become more stylistic, and it's always been that way to some extent. But it's not, again, just what you say, but it's kind of how you deliver the line as well. So it's the stylistic way of, you can have two candidates who, match up 99.9% on different policies, but one of them is able to deliver the message in a different way, a more exciting way, a way that resonates with other people, and sort of that actually ends up becoming a more important piece of the puzzle as well.
Have you had, let's say, had circumstances where you might have misjudged the messenger, and the fact that they did go out and said what they had to say did not work the way you expected it to? Have you ever had anything like that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's ever worked on a campaign has had that happen to them at one point or another, and that's for a variety of reasons, right? So, like, I think the first is sometimes, you know, if you work on campaigns, you only have a limited amount of resources at your disposal to get the job done. So, you know, you don't have an unlimited pool of people that you can dig into to help your candidate deliver that message. So sometimes you have a candidate who is good in some ways, but also imperfect in other ways, and that can definitely create some issues. And you know, sometimes you have candidates who are, again, very good overall and would be very good at governing, but not necessarily the right temperament or the right presentation for the moment that you're in too. So it's sort of, some of it's about meeting the moment as well. And so, yeah, that happens not infrequently. I mean, you see it in a lot of primaries, right? When you have crowded presidential primaries, you'll see a lot of candidates up there, and many of them will share policy priorities and agendas, but stylistically, how they deliver that makes a huge difference in who people end up getting behind and who they don't get behind.
So, and I think that's another important issue, that, for lack of a better term, some sort of preparation, that when you're getting a speaker or enlisting a speaker to speak, or the candidate themselves, some sort of training they need to go through as to how to handle themselves in front of an audience. What to say, not to say, being friendly, hand gestures, how you speak, the tone you speak in, those kinds of things, so that that message does get over like you want it to.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned body language, because that is a huge communication. I mean, people are able to take in a lot of information from body language. So not even just the words that you're saying, but how you physically, like your physical presence on a stage, physical presence on TV. And you see it a lot when people have sort of a stiff, kind of delivery. They don't seem especially, like they're having a good time, for example. Like, I think it's important for candidates to look like they're having a little bit of fun out there as well. If you look like you're losing, no one's going to want to vote for you, right? So you do see that in body language sometimes. So you're 100% right about that.
Right. And don't look at your watch like you've got somewhere else to go.
Yeah, like, let's hurry this up. Let's get through it. That's right. We've all been there, right?
Right. One of the other things I learned, as I mentioned to you, I lived in Delaware for a couple of months during the second administration, or upcoming second administration for Bill Clinton, and getting to manage, if you will, deal with people at the levels of governor and lieutenant governor and mayor and so forth and so on is another skill that you need to come up with, because they are people who are used to having things done for them a certain way, and in campaigns you're not the leader there. You are trying to get other people to do something that you want them to do, and that's not an authoritative position for you to be in as you're trying to get them to do that.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the hand-to-hand political aspects of some of these campaigns can be very challenging. Like you noted, going into a town and you're trying to get the mayor to endorse or deliver a message in a particular way. That's a whole. You're on their turf. Mm-hmm. When you're coming in, especially if you're talking about a big national campaign or even like a statewide campaign. In some cases, you're coming in, and oftentimes you're coming in a little cold, right? I mean, you would hope that that you have, a little bit of, have some relationships, and most times you do, but you are coming in a little cold in some of these cases, and you have to figure out, okay, what is the local style here? What are the perspectives of the local elected officials? Do they have a different idea about things? And look, I mean, the interesting thing about running a campaign is you ask 10 different people about what you should do, and you're going to get 10 different answers sometimes, and that can be very, very hard. And you do run into that, on the ground as well. But there's also a lot of value in listening, to folks who are on the ground, because they're there 365 days a year. They're on the ground. They're listening to their constituents. They have a sense of like there is actually still. I mean, I'm a believer in this. There is still a place, I believe, for gut, kind of gut feeling. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're talking to local elected officials, right? Because they have a good feel for what's happening in their specific area. So it's really interesting. Like in 2016, I think we saw a lot of this, where if you lived in certain places, right, like people had distinctly different feelings about what was going to happen. So like a lot of folks who lived in more Democratic areas, I think, felt pretty confident that Hillary Clinton might win. And then, for folks who lived in more mixed areas, or even more Republican areas, I think there's a real sense on the ground that there was something else going on there. There was some undercurrent that wasn't quite being picked up in the modeling and the polling, in all of the analytics that the campaigns were running. So, there is value to really putting your ear to the ground and saying, hey, like what's going on in your community? Tell me about it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I also got out of, particularly when I was in Delaware and I had to deal with the Secret Service and the advanced teams, that a lot of people have a tendency to overlook sometimes, is details. I don't think I'd ever been faced with so many questions about details from both the Secret Service and the advanced team about who, where, how, when, all of those other sort of questions. How many steps, which doors, who's on the stage, all those other kinds of things. And what that did for me was to carry that on into other areas. That because details are important. The smallest detail can cause a major problem if it's not attended to as the way it should have been. So I think details, and then dealing with people, having to deal with the governor, lieutenant governor, the mayor, and how do you handle them? And to make sure that, they come on board doing what it is you're asking them to do. It's those kinds of things. So managing people at certain levels, and a lot of attention to the details for whatever the project happens to be.
Oh, 100%. I mean, hats off to all of the people out there doing advanced work. I mean, there are very few things. It's sort of an unsung. They're the unsung heroes of campaigns and even in government, right? Because there's a lot of advanced work, at the higher levels of government that go into, making sure that different events or things like that go off without a hitch. So I mean, like hats off to the advanced people. They do a really, really tough job. In to your point about details, I think any political practitioner that's not necessarily involved directly with the advanced work can learn a thing or two about being a little bit more detail oriented and making sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But it's some of the most important work on these campaigns are the folks who come out several days, several weeks early to make sure that everything is set up properly, that everyone is reading from the same book and same script, and so there's nothing quite like good advance work. I think that's a huge bonus. But yes, I think there's a lot of folks who could probably learn from really solid advanced teams on these campaigns, because they do really good work and very important work too.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, having been up and close personal to those sort of things, I've seen the slippage when people don't do that, having been in some meetings and they're doing the planning and so forth, and then they say, okay, well, fine, here's what we need so-and-so to do here, give that to them. Well, some of those people maybe should have been in the room, because perhaps that small thing that you're giving to them is not being done in the right way, because there's certain procedures that need to be taken care of. You don't know that. You did not invite them to the room to ask them those kinds of things. So if they get it and the implementation, they don't have time to correct it, and the implementation is right around the corner, you can have a big mess on your hands. So my other point is that any and everybody who's involved in planning some event needs to be at the table at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you do not want surprises on the day of. I mean, that is the absolute worst thing. No
Right.
surprises on the day of, and when you do get a surprise on the day of, it is an unpleasant experience for anyone who's been in that situation.
So, Matt, what other things do you think that our listeners should know about planning campaigns and what needs to be done, and the timelines and the amount of time that's required, those sort of things, and the people involved in planning campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the public. Oftentimes, you watch the campaign through the lens of social media, or you're watching news, network news or cable news, and reading newspapers, reading articles about it, and I would say that only captures a tiny fraction of the work that goes on below the surface. With the in some cases, hundreds, thousands of people who are making the wheels turn every single day. I mean, in a presidential campaign, really what you're talking about are 50 separate campaigns, right? In each state, you have an apparatus in each state. You have staffers dedicated to making sure volunteers are coming into the office and getting out and knocking doors and communicating with local media. And it's a big, wide country. So it's a tough job because conditions change every single day. There's always something to react to. There's always something going on. So it's really in terms of teaching lessons that can be applied elsewhere, whether it's in the boardroom or in some other context. There is no better training ground than a campaign, I don't think. And there are so many different facets and details and pieces of strategy, and then implementing that strategy, execution of that strategy is so important. And there's so many people doing that work, that you never hear about, but are extraordinarily important to the effort. So not to mention on some of these larger campaigns, again, statewide, national, even some of the congressional districts, you need to have the team working together well, the different pieces. So again, on the communication side, you need the pollsters who to communicate clearly with the television vendors, with the direct mail consultants, with the digital consultants, to ensure that everyone's rowing in the same direction on this stuff. So the campaigns are extraordinarily complex operations. On the smaller side, sometimes you have a really, really small team doing all of these different functions. And in some cases, and I'm sure you've been in this situation too, if you've ever done certain local campaigns, they can be extraordinarily hard to run and demand a ton of time and energy and effort, and present its own set of challenges, right? More so even in some of the larger campaigns. So because you're on the ground with a smaller team, working through a lot of the same challenges, right? It's a smaller electorate, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to react, just as quickly or try to plan ahead in the way that you would for a much larger campaign. So it's definitely a very instructive experience for folks who are in the communication space like us. I mean, that's where we got our start, and have learned a ton. Every day is some kind of crisis, whether it's big or small, you're figuring out how to react and keep cool and try to respond in the most productive way possible. So that's, so it's definitely an interesting thing. And the speed at which these campaigns move is really, sort of awe-inspiring in some ways, because, we saw over the last, couple of days here, switching over a whole presidential campaign to support Vice President Harris on the Democratic side of things. I don't think people outside of the campaign world will ever fully see how much of a Herculean task that was. And yet they got it done in a big way. Branding, they switched the branding. They, were scheduling the vice president, getting her out to different events, setting up speeches, making sure that the campaign team was in place. The political work of managing the endorsement process. I mean, it's a lot of moving pieces there. So a hat tip to those folks too, who were able to turn that ship around really quickly.
let me just say in terms of having worked in campaigns, both, as I said, at the statewide level, several states, in Delaware, there were two of us. I was the communications director. You had the other guy who was doing other things, and on occasion I had to go with the governor or the lieutenant governor to a radio station to have some background information on the side. So if a question came up that they didn't have the answer to, I had to write something down to them right quick to give it to them so they could respond to that. Or if we were in Wilmington, which is the largest city in Delaware, that was one thing. But if I'm down in South Delaware, which is a small rural community, that's a whole different animal to deal with down there. So in terms of, as you said, being prepared, second opportunity I had was somewhere out in Ohio. You have surrogates that are working for the president, and you have to go from one city to another, a busload of folks, and you get off and you get on, and so and you have to deal with the media in each individual city. So a lot of things that you have to be prepared to do as a from my perspective as a communications person, and these things were vital to me as I moved on, because when I went into, after the Clinton administration was done and you go into other places, you find out how different, in other words, when it comes to details, how much they overlook. You can ask people questions about their own job, but they don't have answers to them because and then nobody ever asks them about that. So I advise anybody who has the willingness to do so, if you can get into a political campaign, get in there, because you're going to do a lot of work, but you're also going to learn a lot of things, and it will move you and help advance you in a lot faster fashion.
Oh, 100%. You're right. It is like an accelerator for learning everything that you would need to know in the communication space and strategy space. I mean, there's really nothing better than running a campaign. That is for sure. And I value every minute that we've fortunately been able to work on some good campaigns with some great people, great candidates, and you learn a ton. You learn a ton every day. It's a learning experience.
And it's a door opener too, because some of those folks go on to get some very heavy duty jobs, and if they know you and the work that you did, that sort of eases the pathway. Maybe not to a job, but at least to getting the door open for you to get in there to see them, and who knows where that can take you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it definitely opens doors. And I think people do intuitively understand, when they're looking for someone to support them outside of the political sphere, support them in a crisis situation, or they're trying to make sure that their viewpoint is being heard on a particular policy, or even just positioning a brand or an executive or public figure in a specific way. I think there is some intuitive sense that if you worked on a campaign, you could probably get the job done, because it's all of that but compressed into a very tight timeline with very, very little margin for error.
Well, and I certainly tip my hat to you for saying that, because I've actually been in the room when I've seen some PR people who did not know a lot of things, and they, without some sort of guidance, they would have had a great big mess on their hands. So the experience that you get from a political campaign, I'd urge anyone to get in there if you've got the time and willingness to put up with the long hours and low pay and eating hot dogs and Chinese food most of the time.
That's right. That's right. You don't have to do it forever, but right. I would do it, at least once.
Well, Matt, you provided us with an awful lot of information here in this brief period of time. Is there anything that you think we should know that we didn't cover?
I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, it'll be interesting, and I hope the audience is able to take a look at this cycle, this campaign cycle with a fresh set of eyes, perhaps going into the next couple of months, which are going to be pretty crazy. So I think I hope that this provided some context for what happens behind the curtain, and certainly sharing your expertise as well. I'm hoping. Folks have a new appreciation for what goes on in these campaigns. So I appreciate you having me on.
Well, the other thing I think is important too is that that campaign experience is useful everywhere, wherever you happen to go, because meetings are meetings, and projects are projects. And if you don't have everything you need in place at the right time, then the wheels can come off, and you'll have a big problem on your hands. So being in campaigns, particularly, as I said, working with the Secret Service and advanced teams, The details are hugely important to them, and that really, really helps people prepare. So if, in fact, you're listening, you have some ideas about what it is you'd like to do. If you get a chance to work in a political campaign, I certainly urge you to go and spend the time to get that done. You'll be surprised how much you learn in a short period of time. In some cases, it's graduate school work when it comes to communications.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Matt,
better than a PhD.
That's exactly right. So, Matt, let me say thank you so much for coming on the Public Relations Review podcast today. And I believe that this is the kind of information that people really listen to the podcast for, because it's something that's usable, that they can put into action, and it actually will help them perhaps get ahead in what it is that they do in their daily job or upcoming profession. So let me say thank you again for taking the time to come on to the podcast.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Okay. And to our listeners, again, my guest today is Matt Krayton. He is the founder and principal of Publitics. And if you'd like to have more, hear more from, listen to the podcast, and you can get more from mattpolitics.com, and you can look him up and maybe give them a call. And if you've enjoyed the podcast, we'd certainly like to get a review from you. And, of course, share the podcast of this particular episode with your friends. And don't forget to tune in to us for the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.